The rain had started suddenly, one of those late summer storms that seemed to come out of nowhere. Michael Harris and his best friend, Daniel Brooks, had just left a small gathering a few blocks away when the first heavy drops fell. At first, they laughed about it, thinking they could outrun the weather, but within minutes the sky opened up, drenching them from head to toe. They sprinted through the dark streets, sneakers splashing in puddles, shirts sticking to their backs, until Daniel pointed to his house up the block. "Come on, we'll dry off at mine," he shouted over the downpour. By the time they reached the porch, water was streaming from their hair and dripping from their sleeves. Rebecca Brooks, Daniel's mother, opened the door with an expression of both surprise and amusement. She had a towel draped over her shoulder, clearly in the middle of cleaning, but she stepped aside instantly. "Good heavens, you two look like you swam here," she said, ushering them in. The warmth of the house hit Michael immediately, carrying the scent of cinnamon and something faintly floral. Rebecca handed each of them a towel, her eyes lingering on Michael just a second longer than he expected. She smiled gently, then shook her head as she glanced at the rain pounding against the windows. "This storm isn't random. My grandmother used to say sudden rain was always a sign." Daniel laughed it off, rubbing his hair dry, but Michael found himself intrigued by the remark. "A sign of what?" he asked. Rebecca's gaze moved toward the window, as though searching for something in the darkness. "Of change. Of truth coming out when you least expect it." Her voice carried a quiet conviction that unsettled Michael more than the storm outside. He told himself it was just her way of speaking, but part of him tucked the words away, curious why they resonated. Rebecca insisted they sit down while she made tea. Michael followed Daniel into the living room, still clutching the towel around his shoulders. He couldn't help but notice the small details of the home: framed photos of Daniel at different ages, a few family portraits with Rebecca smiling radiantly, shelves filled with books that revealed her taste for poetry and travel. When she returned with steaming mugs, her hair loosely tied back, Michael realized how striking she looked in her simple attire. She carried herself with an ease that felt magnetic, a presence that filled the room effortlessly. As they sipped their tea, conversation drifted casually. Daniel complained about classes, about how the party had been boring, and Rebecca teased him in the gentle way mothers often do. Michael mostly listened, though his eyes kept slipping toward her whenever she wasn't looking. Each time he caught himself, he scolded his wandering thoughts. She was his best friend's mother, off limits in every possible way. And yet, something about the storm, about her earlier words, made the evening feel strangely charged. The thunder rolled on as the night deepened. Daniel yawned loudly, stretching before announcing he was going upstairs to crash. "You guys can stay up if you want," he muttered, already halfway to the stairs. Michael considered leaving too, but the rain was still relentless, slapping against the roof and windows like it had no intention of stopping. Rebecca seemed to read his hesitation. "No sense in going back out there. You can stay the night if you'd like. I'll set up the couch." Michael thanked her, though part of him knew he'd already accepted the unspoken offer the moment she said it. Once Daniel had disappeared upstairs, the house grew quiet except for the rain. Rebecca returned to the living room and sat across from him. The television hummed softly in the background, some old movie playing, but neither of them paid it much attention. Michael could feel the weight of the silence between them, not uncomfortable exactly, but heavy with something unspoken. She glanced at him and smiled faintly. "Funny how storms can trap people together," she said, almost to herself. He nodded, unsure how to respond, and wrapped the towel tighter around his shoulders. The minutes passed slowly, the ticking of the wall clock louder than usual. Rebecca asked him about school, about his plans after graduation, and he found himself opening up more than he expected. She listened intently, her eyes never breaking from his. There was a warmth there, but also something searching, as if she were trying to understand him on a deeper level. He realized his pulse had quickened, though nothing had been said that could explain it. When another burst of thunder shook the house, Rebecca's eyes flicked toward the window again. "It really is a sign," she murmured, her voice soft but firm. Michael swallowed, unsure if she meant the storm outside or something else entirely. He wanted to ask, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he leaned back, pretending to watch the movie, though his thoughts were far from the screen. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, as though the rain had sealed them off from the rest of the world. Rebecca eventually rose and collected the empty mugs. "You should get some rest," she said gently, but there was a hesitation in her tone that made Michael's chest tighten. He watched her disappear into the kitchen, the sway of her figure leaving an imprint in his mind he knew he shouldn't entertain. When she returned, she gave him a blanket and wished him good night, her eyes holding his for just a moment longer than necessary. Michael lay back on the couch, listening to the storm, but his thoughts refused to settle. The sound of rain should have been calming, but instead it echoed with her words, her smile, her presence. Somewhere upstairs, Daniel was fast asleep, blissfully unaware of the strange tension that had taken root downstairs. Michael closed his eyes, knowing sleep would be difficult, and felt a knot in his stomach that told him the night had only just begun. The rain had not let up through the night, and Michael found himself staring at the ceiling, listening to its steady rhythm. He tossed under the blanket Rebecca had given him, eyes wide open, his mind circling thoughts he wished he could shake away. Every sound in the house seemed magnified, the creak of the stairs, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of thunder. He heard Daniel snoring faintly upstairs, the carefree rhythm of someone at peace. Michael envied him. For all his life, Daniel had been a loyal friend, always the easygoing companion. And yet, here Michael lay with a secret blooming inside him, one he couldn't share, one that felt wrong to even acknowledge. Rebecca appeared again, her steps soft against the wooden floor. She carried a folded throw blanket in her arms, though Michael already had won. "You still awake?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying a warmth that felt almost intimate. Michael sat up, brushing hair from his forehead.
"Yeah, couldn't sleep.
"The storm's too loud." She smiled faintly and set the blanket aside. "I know what you mean. Nights like this make it impossible to rest. Everything feels heavier somehow." She sank into the armchair across from him, her posture relaxed but her eyes focused intently on his. They began to talk, slowly at first, but soon the conversation deepened. Rebecca asked him questions most adults usually brushed off: how he felt about his future, what worried him the most, what he hoped for beyond school. Michael was surprised by how easily he shared pieces of himself he rarely voiced. Her attention never wavered, and there was something disarming about her listening so fully. When she spoke about her own life, her tone shifted. She admitted the difficulties of raising Daniel alone, how the years had worn her down, and how sometimes she missed feeling truly seen. Michael hesitated, the honesty in her confession tugging at him. He had always admired Rebecca from a distance, her strength, her kindness, but now he glimpsed her vulnerability, and it shook him. "You deserve to feel seen," he murmured, not sure where the words came from. Rebecca held his gaze, the quiet intensity between them thicker than the storm outside. The silence stretched. Then her hand brushed against his, an accidental touch, but it lingered. Michael's breath caught. His heart pounded in his chest, warning him of the line he was towing. He told himself to pull away, but he didn't. Instead, he let the warmth of her skin seep into his. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed by a crack of thunder that rattled the windows. Rebecca's lips parted as she whispered, almost as though confessing to herself, "Maybe the rain brought us here for a reason." The weight of her words sent a shiver through him. He shook his head slightly. "This isn't right," he whispered back, but his voice lacked conviction. She leaned closer, her eyes searching his. "Right and wrong aren't always so simple. Sometimes life gives us a sign we can't ignore." Her hand moved to his cheek, her touch delicate, filled with a kind of tenderness that broke through his resistance. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, fighting the urge, before he felt her lips press softly against his. The kiss started tentative, almost questioning, but quickly deepened, fueled by months, perhaps years, of unspoken tension. Michael's chest burned with equal parts desire and guilt, but he didn't stop. The storm roared outside, its rhythm in sync with the racing of his heart. His hands trembled as he held her, overwhelmed by the reality of what was happening. When they finally pulled back, breathless, Michael's eyes darted toward the stairs. "Daniel's right upstairs," he whispered urgently, the weight of betrayal crashing down on him. Rebecca's expression softened, but she didn't look regretful. Instead, she seemed calm, almost certain. "I know, but sometimes the heart chooses for us." The words both comforted and terrified him. He sat frozen, struggling to reconcile the bond he had just broken. The guilt pressed in hard, but so did the memory of her lips, the warmth of her hand, the undeniable electricity that lingered between them. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just breathed, the storm outside echoing the storm within. Rebecca reached out, brushing his hair back from his forehead in a gesture that felt both maternal and dangerously intimate. "We don't have to talk about this again," she said softly. "But what happened tonight, it doesn't have to be shame. It can just be truth." Her words rattled him more than the thunder had. Michael could only nod, unable to form a response. When she finally rose to her feet, her movements were graceful, deliberate. "Get some rest, Michael," she said, as though the moment hadn't shattered boundaries. She walked away, leaving him with his racing heart and an ache of conflict he knew he would carry long after the storm passed. Michael lay back down on the couch, though sleep felt impossible now. Every time he closed his eyes, he replayed the kiss, the way her touch had made him feel alive in a way he hadn't expected. At the same time, the image of Daniel's easy smile filled his mind, twisting the knife of guilt deeper. The house was quiet again, but inside Michael there was only chaos. He realized, with a sinking certainty, that nothing would ever feel the same again. The morning light filtered softly through the blinds, cutting across the living room where Michael lay on the couch. His eyes were heavy, though he hadn't truly slept. Every time he closed them, the night before came rushing back. The brush of Rebecca's hand, the heat of her lips, the words she'd whispered about signs and truth. Now, in the quiet of the early morning, all of it felt almost unreal, like a dream he wished he could either deny or fully embrace. Instead, it sat in him like a stone, heavy and immovable. Upstairs, Daniel stirred, his footsteps loud as he bounded down the stairs with his usual energy. "Morning, man," he said, clapping Michael on the shoulder. "You crash okay?" Michael forced a smile, hoping his friend couldn't see the guilt written across his face.
"Yeah, fine.
"The storm kept me up a little, but I managed." His voice sounded normal, casual, though inside, he was unraveling. Rebecca entered the kitchen a moment later, dressed neatly as though the night had been uneventful. Her hair was pulled back, her expression serene. She greeted them both with a warm smile, though Michael noticed her eyes flicker toward him for the briefest second, an acknowledgement, a reminder of the secret they now shared. Daniel didn't notice. He never did. They sat down to breakfast together, the clink of silverware on plates filling the room. Daniel talked about plans for the day, about catching a game later, and maybe grabbing food with some friends. Michael nodded along, but his mind was far away. Every time Rebecca moved, every time her voice touched the air, he felt the tension pressing down on him. He avoided her gaze, afraid of what he might see there, and afraid of what Daniel might notice if he looked too long. After breakfast, Daniel went upstairs to grab something he'd forgotten. The moment he was gone, the air shifted. Rebecca stood at the sink, rinsing dishes, her back turned to Michael. "You don't need to look so guilty," she said quietly, her tone even but firm. Michael froze, unsure if she was scolding him or reassuring him. "I can't help it," he admitted, his voice low. "He's my best friend. Last night, it feels like I betrayed him." Rebecca turned, drying her hands slowly. "What happened was between you and me. Daniel doesn't need to know. Sometimes, life gives us moments that don't fit into the rules we've been taught. It doesn't make them meaningless." She stepped closer, her eyes steady on his. "Don't let guilt erase what was real." Michael's chest tightened. He wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that the moment had some deeper purpose. but the weight of loyalty pressed hard on him. He thought of all the years Daniel had been at his side, all the trust between them, and now how quickly he had jeopardized it. He rubbed his hands over his face, unable to respond. When Daniel returned, the conversation shifted back to normal as if nothing had happened. They joked, packed up to head out, and the world moved on. Yet inside Michael, everything felt fractured. He couldn't shake the memory of Rebecca's words, the certainty in her voice when she spoke about signs and truth. Was it really fate that had pulled them together in the storm, or had they simply let desire disguise itself as destiny? As the morning stretched into afternoon, Michael prepared to leave. Daniel walked him to the door, slapping him on the back like always. "Catch you later, man," he said cheerfully. Michael forced a grin, though the guilt gnawed at him like a hidden wound. Rebecca appeared in the hallway just as he was about to step outside. Their eyes met for a second too long, the silence between them heavier than words. She gave him the faintest nod, a silent promise that their secret would remain buried. Michael stepped outside into the clear, sunlit day. The storm had passed, the streets glistening with the aftermath of rain, but the air was calm now, deceptively peaceful. He walked slowly, each step carrying him farther from the Brooks house, but not from the turmoil in his chest. He thought about Rebecca's certainty, about the way she had framed the night as something inevitable. Yet deep down, he knew that inevitability and choice were not the same. As he moved down the street, he realized that the storm outside had ended, but the one inside him had only begun. He would carry it with him. Every glance, every whispered word, every kiss hidden under the sound of thunder. Some truths, he realized, could never be spoken, and some signs were not meant to be followed. Yet once you stepped into them, there was no way to turn back. The sunlight warmed his face, but he felt no comfort in it. The world went on as if nothing had changed, but for Michael Harris, everything had. He had crossed a line he could never uncross, tied himself to a secret that would haunt him every time he saw his best friend, every time he remembered the rain. And in that haunting, he knew he would forever wonder whether the storm had been a sign of destiny, or a temptation that had rewritten his life in silence.